All right, YouTube. There's a running joke that London is now called Londonistan, that it's primarily a piece of the Pakistani caliphate or something like that. And the latest news out of the UK, let's face it, isn't going to help that go away. Now, think what you will about actual mass immigration itself, about multiculturalism versus nationalism, whatever. I can guarantee you that this specific little piece of news is going to continue to inflame tensions in the UK, is going to continue to inflame tensions in Western Europe at large. Not so much Eastern Europe, because mass immigration isn't happening there. The countries don't want any part of it. And honestly, because they've got decrepit welfare systems for the most part, no migrants actually want to go there for free handouts. The UK has just seen its first Islamic mayor of London elected, Sadiq Khan. Now, the fact that he's Islamic, I think, bothers relatively few people in the UK. You've got to realize one of the largest parties is essentially a communist party. That's the Labour Party, and that's the party, of course, that Sadiq Khan is a member of. He certainly isn't a UKIP member or in BNP or something like that. He's of Pakistani origin. He's in Labour. It's essentially a socialist party, or you may term it almost a communist party. I think the Liberal Democrats are closer to communism. The Labour Party's closer to, like, run-of-the-mill socialism. Neither one's going to help the UK, but I guess there's at least a little bit of a difference between the two. But then again, their conservatives are basically our liberal Democrats. UKIP's basically are moderate Democrats. Then BNP would be considered like left-leaning Republicans here. They've got no far-right parties. I have still, to this day, not actually encountered, in Western Europe anyway, a single far-right party. They keep talking about the rise of the far-right. And I look at Front National, or I look at any of these other groups, none of them are espousing a far-right platform. They're simply saying we're tired of uncontrolled borders. That's not a far-right position to have. That's a common sense position to have that I think anybody who cares about their country at all would take. That's a problem that we've been working through here in the United States. People are getting fed up, including immigrants, are getting fed up with uncontrolled immigration, specifically because of the effect it has upon jobs that legal immigrants really want for themselves. So it's because I think that Trump's going to do better with Hispanics than a lot of people want to admit. Back to London, though. This is going to inflame things in Europe. Now, I've said before, and racial nationalists don't understand this, so I'll try to explain it again. Because I'm a libertarian nationalist. I'm a cultural nationalist. I believe in nationalism. I don't apply it to race and ethnicity, strictly speaking, within the realm of the Americas, because I don't see it as a big problem. The reason is this, and this is why this is fucked, and Western Europe at large has been fucked now for some time. When immigrants come to the United States especially, or to the Americas in general, the assimilation rate is far higher because of the ability of the cultures, with their pride and with their economies and with the general prevailing sense that they're lands of the free or places you can get ahead, or whatever fucking propaganda they use now. Because of that, which is partially propagandistic and partially reality, because of this, the assimilation rate is quite high. So if you've got large-scale immigration to the United States, a lot of those people, unless they had like evil ideas, evil intent to begin with, like, oh, I'll infiltrate and bomb this country or something, most of them tend to assimilate relatively quickly. I do believe, by the way, first-generation immigrants, they are capable of fully assimilating. Of course they are. I've met them. They act hyper-patriotic in some cases. In Europe, that's not the case, though. Europe is seen as boring, as outdated and crowded and fucked up by socialism and all of these other things. Europe has not solved its own underlying problems. And until it does, and it can't do this with mass immigration existing at all, especially with all the socialists in charge there, until it solves these problems, you're not going to see a high assimilation rate. These groups will remain primarily of their original origins themselves. That is, this person's a Pakistani who just happens to live in France. That person's a Yemeni who happens to live in Ireland. Here's a Moroccan or a Somalian or something that happens to live in Italy. And That's essentially what they will consider themselves, is a reason why they riot in the streets constantly. It's because they've only gone to Europe to take advantage of the free welfare and the fact that you can get away in many of these countries with raping somebody and getting off on probation by claiming ignorance of the law. There's a reason why so-called far-right parties, that are actually just parties that believe in some semblance of national borders, are on the rise all over Europe. Whether it's Eastern Europe, which hasn't seen as many refugees and migrants, they're simply run by people who have they have a concept in recent living memory of being invaded by a foreign hostile force that hated their culture. It's called the Soviet Union. As you may remember, many of these Eastern European states not that long ago were under the dominion of a bunch of Russians. So they understand what it's like to be invaded and held hostage and have their culture chipped away at for political purposes. That's why they're not tolerating it. The Western Europeans didn't have to deal with that shit. So the Western Europeans, they think, oh, communism's great, socialism, oh, it sounds great, there's nothing wrong with it. Mass migration, oh, nothing wrong here, it's not displacement, it's being tolerant and diverse. Well, you never had to live under that sort of system, so you wouldn't know, you were never there in many cases. So there's going to be a difference between Germans that remember East Germany and Germans that never were in East Germany as far as how they view communism typically. Well, no shit. It's because one person lived under it, experienced what it was like, understands how fucked up it is. The other person, they've got this weird nostalgic pie-in-the-sky view of the Soviet Union or something like that, as though it was a good thing. Well, ask anyone that lived under it. Most of them will say it's not, unless they're slowly losing their mind to dementia and old age. Then they'll say, oh yeah, hail Stalinism, or something like that. Sadiq Khan is so fanatic that he called moderate Muslims Uncle Toms. And he almost kind of sort of got in trouble for this with the very PC British media that said, oh, that sounded pretty bad. They wanted to tone down their criticism a bit because, number one, he's a leftist, number two, he's a Muslim. I found it almost as funny that the person he was primarily running against from the Conservative Party was a Jew. So I'm sure there's no deep-seated animosity here. Yes, a Muslim and a Jew vying for the mayorship of London. I'm sure that they didn't shake their heads when they were in the privacy of their own homes, or flats as they call them in Europe typically. I'm sure when they went home they didn't like bitterly insult one another. Oh, fucking Islamic scum. Oh, Jewish pig. It must have been pretty funny to see if you could see their private conversations with their own families. Both of them probably beating their wives in the process. No, this is of course going to inflame the so-called far right of Europe. It's been growing anyway, and apparently UKIP is making major gains. You know, people appear to be ready to Brexit. That is, the UK, the polling there is kind of back and forth around 50-50, and there's no way to tell necessarily which way it will go as far as the UK wanting to leave the EU. I encouraged that they should leave the EU. Of course they should. They can negotiate on their own much more effectively. They can determine their military policy more effectively. They won't have to deal with the open border crisis. A lot of these problems that have been afflicting countries that signed on to the now toxic EU, a lot of these problems would no longer exist. The EU essentially has devolved into little more than Merkel's own little backyard playpen, where she can exploit other people in Europe at a whim, simply because Germany has so much manufacturing. While the UK doesn't need Germany's help to be a first world country, it's just not necessary. The UK has its own fucking problems. The population density's sky high. They're constantly like clearing things to build more housing, and it's all... to live in the UK must be... I'm not surprised, in a way. I'm not surprised that Muslims or other groups that migrate to the UK don't assimilate. I wouldn't assimilate either, because it looks fucking miserable. Take a look at what the UK looks like now. It's all, the cities are all degraded and like dingy and fucked up, and even the little towns, like everything's all crammed together, and there's like almost no actual forest left. It's just a bunch of farms that's all like, I guess, private property or something. It looks fucked. It looks foggy and cold and boring and rainy. Why would you want to assimilate? How can you have, unless you have a symbol of national pride to rally around, there's not that much there to really differentiate the UK from any other substantially advanced nation. It's like, oh yeah, you get pretty good jobs, pretty good welfare system. I guess the climate's okay. People have an okay quality of life. It's mundane. You're okay. Well, you're a little bit above average or something like that, and you're supposed to make do with it and be proud of that. That's not the way that Europeans typically throughout their history have worked. I'm not surprised that they're pissed off. And that's also, by the way, not the way that Muslims typically worked either. No, these different groups all wanted to rise to the top. When you have a culture that's been built, it's been forged in the fires of struggle for literally centuries or millennia, they're not going to want to make do with, oh, it's just okay. Oh, we have a little bit of pride in our culture, but ultimately we're like evil colonials or something like that. It's just not the way that it works. It's like trying to tell Americans, oh, well, you shouldn't have a sense of national pride. Fuck the flag, all this shit's gay and retarded, natural beauty, who gives a fuck about it? And fuck the Indians, too. It's not going to work very well unless you're talking to someone who is brain damaged. If you're talking to someone who knows literally nothing about anything, then yes, they'll probably be led to agree with you because they'll say, yeah, that's right, it's shit, and then they'll take another toke on their fucking bong or something. You ask anyone who knows shit from Shinola, and they understand why that's wrong. They understand it doesn't make biological sense. It doesn't make evolutionary sense. That culture will eventually consume itself. It'll be displaced, or it'll fucking get knocked off in an invasion somewhere because it doesn't even have the heart to defend itself. So the UK and all these other countries, of course, they're fucking fucked. And this Sadiq Khan dude, a Muslim radical now running London, is no exception to this. But even if you don't have a problem with the fact that he thinks moderate Islam is a bad thing, and he's just a total fucking Pakistani fanatic Islamo-fascist taqiyya user, even if you don't care about that or care about the fact that he's a far leftist in the labor movement or any of these other things, at the very least you have to appreciate that this will take people who are kind of centrist or kind of humdrum, sitting on the fence or whatever, and they're going to move them further to the so-called right, which means move them further towards, I think borders should exist for some reason, even if it's just a chain link fence. Yeah, we should have some sort of border. In the UK, of course, you're an island. So you've got a little bit of an advantage, I guess, over continental Europe. But even then, they're getting fucked up the ass. Just look at London. Look at London and who they just elected. And you can see the PC police obviously have been there for a while, because there's no other way that this person would have been elected after saying the things that he said. It just wouldn't have happened. That's about all. Peace out.